Okay, welcome. I'm going to be reading from the 12th planet. And before I start reading, I'm going to read some of the comments. The book was written, copyright 1976, by Zecharia Sitchin. And I'm going to read some of the praise of his work. Reflects the highest level of scientific knowledge, science and religion news. Exciting, credible, most provocative and compelling library journal. One of the most important books on Earth's roots ever written, East-West Journal. Sitchin is a zealous investigator into man's origin, a dazzling performance. Kirk's Review. For thousands of years, priests, poets, and scientists have tried to explain how man was created. Now a recognized scholar has come forth with a theory that is most astonishing of all, United Press International. One of the most important books on Earth's roots ever written, East-West Journal. Let's begin. Okay, let us begin. So this is going to be page 13 of the 12th planet by Zecharia Sitchin. The endless beginning. Of the evidence that we have amassed to support our conclusion, exhibit number 1 is man himself. In many ways, modern man, Homo sapiens, is a stranger to Earth. Ever since Charles Darwin shook the scholars and theologians of his time with the evidence of evolution, life on Earth has been traced through man and the primates, mammals and vertebrates, and backward through ever lower life forms to the point billions of years ago at which life is presumed to have begun. But having reached these beginnings and having begun to contemplate the probabilities of life elsewhere in our solar system and beyond, the scholars have become more uneasy about life on Earth. Somehow it does not belong here. If it began through a series of spontaneous chemical reactions, why does life on Earth have but a single source and not a multitude of chance sources? And why does all living matter on Earth contain too little of the chemical elements that abound on Earth and too much of those that are rare on our planet? Was life then imported to Earth from elsewhere? Man's position in the evolutionary chain has compounded the puzzle. Finding a broken skull here, a jaw there, scholars at first believed that man originated in Asia some 500,000 years ago. But as older fossils were found, it became evident that the mills of evolution grind much, much slower. Man's ancestor apes are now placed at a staggering 25 million years ago. Discoveries in East Africa reveal a transition to man-like apes, hominids, some 14 million years ago. It was about 11 million years ago later that the first ape man worthy of the classification Homo appeared. The first being considered to be truly man-like, advanced Australopithecus existed in the same parts of Africa some 2 million years ago. It took yet another million years to produce Homo erectus. Finally, another 900,000 years. The first primitive man appeared. He is named Neanderthal after the site where his remains were first found. In spite of the passage of more than 2 million years between advanced Australopithecus and Neanderthal, the tools of these two groups shared stones, were virtually alike, and the group themselves, as they are believed to have looked, were hardly distinguishable. Then suddenly, inexplicably, some 3,500 years ago, a new race of man, Homo sapiens, thinking man in quotation marks, appeared as if from nowhere and swept Neanderthal man from the face of the earth. These modern men, named Cro-Magnon, looked so much like us that if dressed like us in modern clothes, they would be lost in the crowds of any European or American city. Because of the magnificent cave art which they created, they were at first called caveman. In fact, they roam Earth freely, for they knew how to build shelters and homes of stones and animal skins wherever they went. For millions of years, man's tools have been simply stones of useful shapes. Cro-Magnon man, however, made specialized tools and weapons of wood and bones. He was no longer a naked ape. for he used skins for clothing. His society was organized. He lived in clans with a patriarchal hegemony. His caves drawings bespeak artistry and depth of feeling. His drawings and sculptures evidence some form of religion apparent in the worship of a mother goddess, who was sometimes depicted with the signs of the moon crescent. He buried his dead and must therefore have had some philosophies regarding life, death, and perhaps even an afterlife. As mysterious and unexplained as the appearance of Cro-Magnon man has been, the puzzle is still more complicated. For as other remains of modern men were discovered at sites including Swampscone, Steinheim, and Montmarie, it became apparent that Cro-Magnon man stemmed from an even earlier... Let me see, is this working? Can you hear me? I want to make sure you guys can hear me. Okay. Because I thought my microphone was going to work, but apparently it's not. Okay. Hang on, let me go back. Hang on. The appearance of modern men a mere 700,000 years ago after Homo erectus and some 200 years before Neanderthal man is absolutely implausible. It is also clear that Homo sapiens represent as such an extreme departure from the slow evolutionary process that many of our features, such as the ability to speak, are totally unrelated to the earlier primates. An outstanding authority on the subject, Professor Theodosius Dosansky, Mankind Evolving, was especially puzzled by the fact that this development took place during a period when the Earth was going through an ice age, a most unpropitious time for evolutionary advance, pointing out that Homo sapiens lack completely some of the peculiarities of the previous known types and has some that never appeared before. He concluded modern man has many fossil collateral relatives, but no progenitors. Derivation of Homo sapiens then becomes a puzzle. How then did the ancestors of modern man appear some 300 years ago, instead of 2 million or 3 million years ago in the future, following further evolutionary development? Were we imported to Earth from elsewhere, or were we, as the Old Testament and other ancient sources claim, created by the gods, or God? We now know where civilization began and how it developed, and once it began, the unanswered question is why? Why did civilization come about at all? For, as most scholars now admit in frustration by all data, man should still be without civilization. There is no obvious reason that we should be any more civilized than the primitive tribes of the Amazon jungle or the inaccessible parts of New Guinea. But we are told these tribesmen still live as if in the Stone Age because they have been isolated. But isolated from what? If they have been living on the same earth as we, why have they not acquired the same knowledge of sciences and technologies in their own as we supposedly have? The real puzzle, however, is not the backwardness of the Bushmen, but our advancement. For it is not recognized that in the normal course of evolution, man should still be typified by the Bushmen and not by us. It took man some 2 million years to advance in his tool industries from the use of stones as he found them to the realization that he could chip and shape stones to better suit his purpose. Why not another 2 million years to learn the use of other materials, and another 10 million years to master mathematics and engineering and astronomy? Yet here we are, less than 50,000 years from Neanderthal man landing astronauts on the moon. The obvious question then is this: did we and our Mediterranean ancestors really acquire the advanced civilization on our own? Though Cro-Magnon man did not build skyscrapers nor use metals, there is no doubt that his was a sudden and revolutionary civilization. His mobility, ability to build shelters, his desire to clothe himself, his manufactured tools, his art, all were a sudden high civilization breaking an endless beginning of man's culture that stretched over millions of years and advanced at a painfully slow pace. Though our scholars cannot explain the appearance of Homo sapiens and the civilization of Cro-Magnon man, there is by now no doubt regarding the civilization's place of origin. The Near East, the uplands and mountain ranges that extend into Semiarch, from the Zagros Mountains in the east, where present-day Iran and Iraq border on each other, through the Haratat and Taurus ranges in the north, then down westward and southward to the hills lands of Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, are replete with caves where the evidence of prehistoric but modern man has been preserved. One of these caves, Shanandar, is located in the northeastern part of the Semiarch of civilization. Nowadays, fierce Kurdish tribesmen seek shelter in the area caves for themselves and their flocks during the cold winter months. So it was one wintry night, 44,000 years ago, when a family of 7, one of whom was a baby, sought shelter in the cave of Shanidar. Their remains, they were evidently crushed to death by a rockfall, were discovered in 1957 by a startled Ralph Solecki, who went to the area in search of evidence of early man. What he found was more than he expected. As layer upon layer of debris was removed, it became apparent that the cave preserved a clear record of man's habitation in the area from about 100,000 years to some 13,000 years ago. What this record showed was as surprising as the find itself. Man's culture has shown not a progression but a regression. Did you hear that? Not a progression but a regression. Starting from a certain standard, the following generation showed not more advanced but less advanced standards of civilized life. And from about 27,000 BC to 11,000 BC, the regression and dwindling population reached the point of an almost complete absence of habitation. For reasons that are assumed to have been climatic, man was almost completely gone from the whole area for some 16,000 years. And then, circa 11,000 BC, thinking man reappeared with new vigor and on an inexplicable higher cultural level. It was as if an unseen coach watching the faltering human game dispatched to the field a fresh and better trained team to take over from the exhausted one. Throughout the many millions of years of his endless beginning, man was nature's child. He subsisted by gathering the foods that grew wild, by hunting the wild animals, by catching wild birds and fishes. But just as man's settlements were thinning out, just as he was abandoning his abodes, when his material and artistic achievement were disappearing, just then, suddenly, with no apparent reason and without any prior known period of gradual preparation, man became a farmer. Did you hear that? Out of nowhere. Summarizing the work of many eminent authorities on the subject, R.J. Bredwood and B. Howe, Prehistoric Investigations in Iraqi Kurdistan, concluded that genetic studies confirm the archaeological finds and leave no doubt that agriculture began exactly where thinking man had emerged earlier with his first crude civilization. In the Near East, there's no doubt that by now agriculture spread all over the world from the Near Eastern arc of mountains and highlands. Employing sophisticated methods of radiocarbon dating and plant genetics, many scholars from various fields of science concur in the conclusion that man's first farming venture was the cultivation of wheat and barley, probably the domestication of wild variety of emir, assuming that somehow man did undergo a gradual process of teaching himself how to domesticate, grow, and farm a wild plant. The scholars remain baffled by the profusion of other plants and cereals basic to human survival and advancement that kept coming out of the Near East. These included in rapid succession millet, rye, and spelt among the edible cereals, flax, which provided fibers and edible oil, and a variety of fruit-bearing shrubs and trees. In every instance, the plant was undoubtedly domesticated in the Near East for millennia before it reached Europe. It was as though the Near East were some kind of genetic botanical library guided by an unseen hand producing every so often a newly domesticated plant. The scholars who had studied the origins of the grapevine have concluded that its cultivation began in the mountains around northern Mesopotamia and in Syria and in Palestine. No wonder the Old Testament tells us that Noah planted a vineyard and even got drunk of its wine after his ark rested on Mount Ararat as the waters of the deluge receded. The Bible, like the scholars, thus placed the start of wine cultivation in the mountains of northern Mesopotamia. Apples, pears, olives, figs, almonds, pistachios, walnuts all originated in the Near East and spread there to Europe and other parts of the world. Indeed, we cannot help recalling that the Old Testament preceded our scholars by several millennia in identifying the very same area as the world's first orchard. In quotation, and the Lord God planted an orchard in Eden in the east, and the Lord caused to grow out of the ground every tree that is pleasing, pleasant to behold, and that is good for eating. I'm going to pause for a minute because this is big shit. Because civilization and the domestication of plants came out of nowhere at a rate of speed that made no sense to the scholars. I don't think there's an anthropologist that can disagree with this. And scholars, when he was writing this work, agreed with him. The general location of Eden was certainly known to the biblical generation. It was in the east of the land of Israel. It was in a land watered by 4 major rivers, 2 of which are the Tigris and the Euphrates. There can be no doubt that the book of Genesis located the first orchard in the highlands where these rivers originated, in northern eastern Mesopotamia. Bible and science are in full agreement. As a matter of fact, if we read the original Hebrew text of the book of Genesis, not as a theological but as a scientific test, we find that it also accurately describes the process of plant domestication. Science tells us that the process went from wild grasses to wild cereals, to cultivated cereals, followed by fruit-bearing shrubs and trees. This is exactly the process detailed in the first book of Genesis, and I'm about to read it. It's quoted. And the Lord said, let the earth bring forth grasses, cereal, that by seeds produce seeds, fruit trees that bear fruit by species, which contain the seed within themselves. And it was so. The earth brought forth grass cereals, that by seed produce seed, by species and trees that bear fruit, which contain the seed within themselves by species. The book of Genesis goes on to tell us that man, expelled from the orchard of Eden, had to toil hard to grow his food, and by the sweat of thy brow thou shalt eat bread. The Lord said to Adam, it was after that Abel was a keeper of herds and Cain was a tiller of the soil. Man, the Bible tells us, became a shepherd soon after he became a farmer. Scholars are in full agreement with the biblical sequence of events and analyzing the various theories regarding animal domestication. F.E. Zuner, Domestication of Animals, stresses that man could not have acquired the habit of keeping animals in captivity or domestication before he reached the stage of living in social units of some size. Such settled communities, a prerequisite for animal domestication, followed the changeover to agriculture. The first animal to be domesticated was the dog, and not necessarily as man's best friend, but probably also for food. This, it is believed, took place circa 9,500 years BC. The first skeletal remains of dogs have been found in Iran, Iraq, and Israel. Sheep were domesticated at about the same time. The Shinadar cave contains remains of sheep from circa 9,000 BC, showing that a large part of each year's young were killed for food and skins. Goats, which also provided milk, soon followed, and pigs, horned cattle, and hornless cattle were next to be domesticated. For every instance, the domestication began in the Near East. The abrupt change in the course of human events that occurred circa 11,000 BC in the Near East and some 2,000 years later in Europe has led scholars to describe that the time as the clear end of the Old Stone Age, the Paleolithic, and the beginning of a new cultural era, the Middle Stone Age, Mesolithic. The name is appropriate only if one considers man's principal raw material, which continues to be stone. His dwelling in the mountainous areas were still built of stone. His communities were protected by stone walls. His first agricultural implement, the sickle, was made of stone. He honored or protected his dead by covering and adorning their graves with stones. And he used stone to make images of the supreme beings or gods whose benign intervention he sought. One such image found in northern Israel and dated in the 9th millennium BC shows the carved head of a god shielded by a striped helmet and wearing some kind of goggles. From the overall point of view, however, it could be more appropriate to call the age that began circa 11,000 BC not the Middle Stone Age, but the age of domestication. Within the span of a mere 3,600 years ago, overnight, in terms of the endless beginnings, man became a farmer, and wild plants and animals were domesticated. Then a new age clearly followed. Our scholars call it the New Stone Age, Neolithic. But the term is totally inadequate, for the main change that had taken place circa 7500 BC was the appearance of pottery. For a reason that still elude our scholars. Did you hear that? Elude our scholars. But which will become clear as we unfold our tale of prehistoric events. Man's march towards civilization was confined, for the first several millennia after 11,000 BC, to the highlands of the Near East. The discovery of the many uses to which clay could be put was contemporary with man's descent from his mountain abodes towards the lower mud-filled valleys. By the 7th millennium BC, the Near Eastern arc of civilization was teeming with clay or pottery cultures, which produced great numbers of utensils, ornaments, and statuettes. By 5000 BC, the Near East was producing clay and pottery objects of superb quality and fantastic designs. But once again, progress slowed, and by 4500 BC, archaeological evidence indicates regression was all around. Pottery became simpler, stone utensils a relic of the Stone Age, and again began predominant inhabit sites reveal fewer remains. Some sites that had been centers of pottery and clay industries began to be abandoned, and distinct clay manufacturing disappeared. There was a general impoverishment of culture, according to James Millard, earliest civilization of the Near East. Some sites clearly bear the mark of the new poverty-stricken phase. Man and his culture were clearly on the decline. Then suddenly, unexpectedly, inexplicably, the Near East witnessed the blossoming of the greatest civilization imaginable, a civilization in which our own is firmly rooted. A mysterious hand once more picked man out of his decline and raised him to an even higher level of culture, knowledge, and civilization. This is incredible. Again, this is from the book The 12th Planet by Zecharia Sitchin, which supports the concept that we were created by the Anunnakis, which would support, and many of us in the spiritual community, and I'm not talking about New Age, I'm talking about spiritual community, agree that the God of the Old Testament is Enlil. We all agree. A jealous God, an angry God, a vengeful God, fucking unhinged God, okay? And we all agree. Let me continue. Listen to this. I just came to this page, so I'm going to go with it. A boundary stone carved with the symbol of the celestial bodies by a king of Susa depicts these 24 signs, the familiar 12 signs of the zodiac, and symbols that stand for the 12 members of the solar systems. These were the 12 astral gods of Mesopotamia, as well as that of the Hurrians, Hittite, Greek, and all other pantheons. Although our natural counting base is the number 10, the number 12 permeated all matters celestial and divine, long after the Sumerians were gone. There were 12 Greek titans, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 parts to the magical breastplates of the Israelite high priests. The power of the celestial 12 carried over to the 12 apostles of Jesus. And even in our decimal systems, we count from 1 to 12, and only after 12 do we return to 10 and 3, 13, 10 and 4, and so on. Where did this powerful, decisive number 12 stem from? From the heavens? For the solar system, the Mulmul included, in addition to all the planets known to us, also the planet of Anu, the one whose symbols, a radiant celestial body, stood in the Sumerian writings for the god Anu as for the divine. Let me jump. The Epic of Creation. Okay, this is the Epic of Creation. I'm going to read it to you. I think this, yeah, so this is, if you buy this book, it's page 187. The Epic of Creation, chapter 7. On most of the ancient cylinder seals that have been found, symbols that stand for certain celestial bodies, members of our solar systems, appear above the figure of gods or humans. An Akkadian seal from the 3rd millennia BC, now at the Vordi Siastishi, oh my God, in the State Museum in the East Berlin, catalog VA243, departs from the usual manner of depicting the celestial bodies. It does not show them individually, but rather as a group of 11 globes encircling a large rayed star. It is clearly a depiction of the solar system as it was known to the Sumerians, a system consisting of 12 celestial bodies. We usually show our solar system schematically as a line of planets stretching away from the sun in ever-increasing distance. But if we depict the planets not in a line, but one after the other in a circle, the closest Mercury first, then Venus, then Earth, and so on, the result would look something like figure 11. Sorry, you guys can see it. All drawing are schematics and not to scale. Planetary orbits in the drawings that follow are circular rather than elliptical for ease of presentation. If we now take a second look at an enlarge of the solar system depicted on cylinder seal VA243, we shall see that the dots encircling the star are actually globes whose sizes and order conform to that of the solar system depicted in figure 100. The small Mercury is followed by a larger Venus. Earth, the same size as Venus, is accompanied by a small moon. Continuing in counterclockwise direction, Mars is shown correctly as smaller than Earth, but larger than the moon or Mercury. The ancient depiction then shows a planet unknown to us, considerably larger than Earth, yet smaller than Jupiter and Saturn, which clearly follow it. Farther on, another pair perfectly matches our Uranus and Neptune. Finally, the smallest Pluto is also there, but not where we now place it. After Neptune, instead it appears between Saturn and Uranus. Treating the moon as a proper celestial body, the Sumerian depiction fully accounts for all of our known planets, places them in the correct order with the exception of Pluto, and shows them by size. How would they fucking know this? We gotta sit back. Why isn't our scientific community, our anthropologists, our archaeologists, why aren't they all getting together to find out, why is this? How could they know? The problem with that question is the egos of these departments, the egos of the individual people that head these departments across the world. I'll answer it myself. The 4,500-year-old depiction, however, also insists that there was or has been another major planet between Mars and Jupiter. It is, as we shall show, the 12th planet, the planet of the Nephilim. If this Sumerian celestial mat had been discovered and studied 2 centuries ago, astronomers would have deemed the Sumerian totally uninformed, foolishly imagining more planets beyond Saturn. Now, however, we know that Uranus and Neptune and Pluto are really there. Did the Sumerians imagine the other discrepancies, or were they properly informed by the Nephilim that the moon was a member of the solar system in its own right? Pluto was located near Saturn, and there was a 12th planet between Mars and Jupiter. That's insane. You know, I just got ahead. I'm going to share this with you. Is that why the moon looks like it was abandoned? Was the moon thriving? Was the moon as we know it now? Or was the moon a thriving planet held together by the 12th planet, and the 12th planet might have exploded, right? Which would have created a cataclysm, right? To the moon that is now just a crater, a forgotten, not forgotten, but a planet that is just a shell of itself. The long-held theory that the moon was nothing more than a frozen golf ball was now discarded until the successful conclusion of several U.S. Apollo moon missions. He's being politically correct in this one. The best guesses were that the moon was a chunk of matter that had separated from Earth when Earth was still molten and plastic. Were it not for the impact of millions of meteorites which left craters on the face of the moon, it would have been a faceless, lifeless, historyless piece of matter that solidified and forever follows Earth. Observations made by unmanned satellites, however, began to bring such long-held beliefs into question. It was determined that, can you imagine this kind of theory? Like, for a minute, think. Does that make sense to you, that theory? I mean, these are highly educated people, and that's how they theorize the moon. You know what's interesting? And I call it the unspoken knowing. Sometimes you get the knowledge of something with the inability to break it down. Do you understand? Like EMC square. It wasn't Einstein that broke it down. It was a dream. He got a hit, EMC square. And then it was calculated by others, really. Observation made by unnamed... The experiments conducted on the moon by the American astronauts and the study and analysis of the soil and rock samples they brought back have established beyond doubt that the moon, though presently barren, was once a living planet. Like Earth, it is layered, which means that it solidified from its own original molten stage. Like Earth, it generated heat. But whereas Earth heat comes from its radioactive materials cooked inside Earth under tremendous pressure, the moon's heat comes apparently from layers of radioactive materials lying near the surface. Those materials, however, are too heavy to have floated up, what then deposited them near the moon's surface. The moon gravity field appears to be erratic, as though huge chunks of heavy matter, such as iron, had not evenly sunk to its core, but were scattered about. But what process of force, we might ask? There is evidence that the ancient rocks of the moon were magnetized. There's also evidence that the magnetic fields were changed or reversed. Was it by some unknown internal process or by an undetermined outside influence? The Apollo 16 astronauts found on the moon rocks called breccias that resulted from the shattering of solid rock and its rewelding together by extremes and sudden heat. Then, when and how were these rocks shattered, then refused? I hope you guys don't believe that we ever went to the moon. Okay, there's enough evidence. We didn't go anywhere. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the hit I'm getting to explain why they would come back with materials, quote unquote, come back, is that the materials actually came from Area 51. And there would have been, just like you and I carry crystals from planet Earth. There would have been creatures, ETs, whatever you want to call them. I wouldn't call them ETs, but sentient soul beings, starseeds, who would have had in their crash cockpits, whatever, materials from other planets. So whatever the hell they have, and I know that there's been evidence of meteorites falling and even some substance. Oh my God, I just remembered this. I remembered a guy who talked about Area 51, and they had come across a metal, a type of metal that they could not, it was not from this planet. And we keep getting little bits and dribs throughout the years, okay, of compound metals and I'm going to call them rocks, whatever, for the lack of a better word, that we cannot explain it's not from here. It is not from this planet. That fall to this planet or are left behind. I'm going to say fall to this planet. Because this is a good question. When and how were these rocks shattered and then refused? Other surface materials on the moon are rich in rare radioactive potassium and phosphorus, materials that on Earth are deep down inside. Putting such findings together, scientists are now certain that the moon and Earth formed or roughly the same elements or about the same time, evolved as separate celestial beings. In the opinion of the scientists of the U.S. National Aeronautics and Space Administration, aka NASA, the moon evolved normally for its first 500 million years. Then they said, as reported in the New York Times, the most cataclysmic period became 4 billion years ago, when celestial bodies the size of large cities, small countries, came crashing into the moon and formed its huge basin and towering mountains. Did you know it had towering mountains? I mean, I know we can see it through telescopes, powerful telescopes and satellites. The huge amount of radioactive material left by the collision began heating the rock beneath the surface, melting massive amounts of it, and forcing seas of lava through cracks in the surface. Apollo 15 found a rock slide in the crater Tsiolkovsky, 6 times greater than any rock slide on Earth. Apollo 16 discovered that the collision that created the Sea of Nectar deposited debris as much as 1,000 miles away. Apollo 17 landed near a scarp 8 times higher than any on Earth, meaning it was formed by a moonquake 8 times more violent than any earthquake in history. The convulsion following that cosmic event continued for some 800 million years, so that the moon's makeup and surface finally took on their frozen shape some 3.2 billion years ago. The Sumerians, then, were right to depict the moon as a celestial body in its own right. And as we shall see soon, they also left us a text that explains and describes the cosmic catastrophe to which the NASA experts refer. The planet Pluto has been called the enigma, while the orbits around the sun of the other planets deviate only somewhat from a perfect circle. The deviation, eccentricity of Pluto is such that it has the most extended and elliptical orbit around the sun, while the other planets orbit the sun more or less within the same place. Pluto is out of kilter by a whopping 17 degrees. Because of these unusual features of its orbit, Pluto is the only planet that cuts across the orbits of another planet, Neptune. In size, Pluto is indeed in the satellite class. Its diameter is 3,600 miles, is not much greater than that of Triton, a satellite of Neptune, or Titan, one of the 10 satellites of Saturn. Because of its unusual characteristics, it's been suggested that this misfit might have started its celestial life as a satellite that somehow escaped its master and went into orbit around the sun on its own. This, as we shall see soon, is indeed what happened according to the Sumerian text. And now, we reach the climax of our search for answers to primeval celestial events, the existence of the 12th planet. Astonishing as it may sound, our astronomers have been looking for evidence that indeed such a planet once existed between Mars and Jupiter. Toward the end of the 18th century, even before Neptune had been discovered, several astronomers demonstrated that the planet were placed at certain distance from the sun according to some definite law. The suggestion, which came to be known as Bode's Law, convinced astronomers that a planet ought to be revolving in a place where hitherto no planet had been known to exist, that is, between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. Spurring by these mathematical calculations, astronomers began to scan the skies in the indicated zone for the missing planet. On the first day of the 19th century, the Italian astronomer Giuseppe Piaggi discovered at the exact indicated distance a very small planet, 485 miles across, which he named Ceres. By 1804, the number of asteroids, small planets found there, rose to 4. To date, nearly 3,000 asteroids have been counted, orbiting the sun in what is now called the asteroid belt. Beyond any doubt, this is the debris of a planet that had shattered to pieces. Russian astronomers have named it Phaeton, which means chariot. While astronomers are certain that such a planet existed, they are unable to explain its disappearance. Did the planet self-implode? but then its pieces would have flown off in all directions and not stayed in a single belt. If a collision shattered the missing planet, where is the celestial body responsible for the collision? Did it also shatter? But the debris circling the sun, when added up, is inefficient to account for even one whole planet, to say nothing of two. Also, if the asteroids comprise the debris of two planets, then they should have retained the axial revolution of two planets. But all the asteroids have a single axial rotation, indicating they come from a single celestial body. How then was the missing planet shattered, and what shattered it? The answer to these puzzles have been handed down to us from antiquity. About a century ago, the decipherment of the text found in Mesopotamia unexplainably grew into a realization that there, in Mesopotamia, texts existed that not only parallel but also preceded portions of the Holy Scripture. Die Kelschriften und das Alte Testament by Edbhar Schrader in 1872 started an avalanche of books, articles, lectures, and debates that lasted a half century. Was there a link at some earlier time between Babylon and the Bible? The headlines provocatively affirmed or denounced Babel und Bibel. Among the texts uncovered by Henry Layard in the ruins of the library of Ushuppa-Nipal in Nivane, there was one that told a tale of creation not unlike one in the book of Genesis. The broken tablets, first pieced together and published by George Smith in 1876, the Chaldean Genesis, that's what it's called. Hang on, I gotta take a... conclusively establish that there was indeed existed an Akkadian text written in the old Babylonian dialect that related how a certain deity created heaven and earth and all upon earth, including man. A vast literature now exists that compared the Mesopotamian text with the biblical narrative. So the Old Testament was, at least Genesis, was stolen. It was appropriated. It was stolen. And the question is why? The Babylonian deities' work was done, not in 6 days and over the span of 6 tablets, parallel to the biblical God's 7 day of rest, enjoyment of his handiwork. The Mesopotamian epic devotes a 7th tablet to the exaltation of the Babylonian deity and his achievement. Appropriately, L.W. King named his authoritative text on the subject, the 7 tablets of creation, now called the creation epic. The text was known in antiquity by its opening words, Enuma Elish, when in the heights. The biblical tale of creation begins with the creation of heaven and earth. The Mesopotamian tale is a true cosmogony, dealing with prior events and taking us to the beginning of time. So it's in German and then translated. Enuma Elish la Nabu Shama Mu. When in the heights, heaven had not been named. Shaplitu Amatum Shuma Lak Zakrat. And below firm ground, earth had not been called. It was then, the epic tells us, that two primeval celestial bodies gave birth to a series of celestial gods. As the number of celestial beings increased, they made great noise and commotion, disturbing the primeval father. His faithful messenger urged him to take strong measure to discipline the younger gods, but they ganged up on him and robbed him of his creative powers. The primeval mother sought to take revenge. The god who led the revolt against the primeval father had a new suggestion. Let his young son be invited to join the assembly of the gods and be given supremacy, so that he might go fight single-handedly the monster their mother turned out to be. Granted supremacy, the young god Marduk, according to the Babylonian version, proceeded to face the monster, and after a fierce battle vanquished her and split her in two. One part of her he made heaven, and the other earth. He then proclaimed a fixed order in the heaven, assigning to each celestial god a permanent position. On earth, he produced the mountain and seas and rivers, established the seasons and vegetation, and created man. In duplication of the heavenly abode, Babylon and its towering temple were built on earth. Gods and mortals were given assignments, commandments, and rituals to be followed. The gods then proclaimed Marduk the supreme deity and bestowed on him the 50 names, the prerogatives, and numerical rank of the Enlilships. As more tablets and fragments were found and translated, it became evident that the text was not a simple literary work. It was the most hallowed historical religious epic of Babylon, read as part of the New Year rituals. Intended to propagate the supremacy of Marduk, the Babylonian version made him the hero of the tale of creation. This, however, was not always so. There is enough evidence to show that the Babylonian version of the epic was a masterful religious political forgery. Did you hear that? Forgery of earlier Sumerian versions in which Anu, Enlil, and Ninurta were the heroes. Do you see why I have a problem with these books? 2,000-year-old Bible, the Torah, the Quran. I have problems with these religions because they do not bring the solace that is eternal solace. It brings temporary solace. Truth is the only solace. The absolute fucking truth, even if it hurts. No matter, however, what the actors in the celestial and divine drama were called, the tale is certainly as ancient as Sumerian civilization. Most scholars see it as a philosophical work. Of course they do, but not the Bible. That's absolutely it's absolutely, that's it. That's the reality. But this is philosophical work. This makes me laugh. The arrogance is unhinged. So most scholars see it as a philosophical work, the earliest version of the eternal struggle between good and evil, or as an allegorical tale of nature's winter and summer, sunrise and sunset, death and resurrection. But why not take the epic at face value as nothing more nor less than the statement of cosmological facts as known to the Sumerians, as told them by the Nephilim? Using such a bold and novel approach, we find that the epic of creation perfectly explains the events that probably took place in our solar system. The stage on which the celestial drama Enuma Elish unfolds is their primeval universe. The celestial actors are the ones who create as well as the ones being created. Act 1. So this is from the actual book, okay? I'm reading it too. When in the heights heaven had not been named, and below earth had not been called, not but primordial Apsu, their begetter, Mumu and Tiamat, she who bore them all, their waters were mingled together. No reed had yet formed, no marshland had appeared, none of the gods had yet been brought into being. None bore a name, their destinies were undetermined. Then it was that gods were formed in their midst. With a few strokes of the stylus pen, upon the first clay tablet, in 9 short lines, the ancient poet manages to seat us in front row center and boldly and dramatically raise the curtains on the most majestic show ever, the creation of our solar system. In the expanse of spaces, the gods, the planets, are yet to appear to be named, to have their own destinies. Their orbits fixed. Only 3 bodies exist. Primordial Apsu, one who exists from the beginning. Mumu, one who was born, and Tiamat, maiden of life. The waters of Apsu and Tiamat were mingled, and the text makes it clear that it does not mean the waters in which reeds grow, but rather the primordial waters, the basic life-giving elements of the universe. Apsu, then, is the sun, one who exists from the beginning. Nearest him is Mumu. The epic's narrative makes clear later on that Mumu was the trusted aide and emissary of Apsu, a good description of Mercury, the small planet rapidly running around his giant master. Indeed, this was the concept the ancient Greeks and Romans had of the god planet Mercury, the fast messenger of the gods. Farther away was Tiamat. She was the monster that Marduk later chattered, the missing planet. But in primordial times, she was the very first virgin mother of the first divine trinity. The space between her and Apsu was not void. It was filled with the primordial elements of Apsu and Tiamat. These waters commingled, and a pair of celestial gods, planets, were formed in the space between Apsu and Tiamat. Quoting, their waters were mingled together. Gods were formed in their midst. God Lamu and God Lahamu were brought forth. By name they were called. Etymologically, the names of these two planets stem from the root, I'm going to say LHM, to make war. The ancients bequeathed to us the tradition that Mars was the god of war and Venus the goddess of love. Love and war, Lamu and Lahamu, are indeed male and female names, respectively. And the identity of the two gods of the epic and the planets Mars and Venus is thus affirmed both etymologically and mythologically. It is also affirmed astronomically as the missing planet. Tiamat was located beyond Mars. Mars and Venus are indeed located in a space between the sun, Apsu, and Tiamat. We can illustrate this by following the Sumerian celestial map. The process of the formation of the solar system then went on. Lamu and Lahamu, Mars and Venus, were brought forth, but even before they had grown in age and in stature to an appointed size, God Anshar and God Kishar were formed, surpassing them in size. At length in the days and multiplied the years, God Anu became their son, of his ancestors a rival, then Eshnar, firstborn Anu, as his equal, and in his image being begot, Ni Nu Dimunind. What a terseness matched only by the narrative precision. Act 1 of the epic of creation has been swiftly played out before our very eyes. We are informed that Mars and Venus were to grow only to a limited size, but even before their formation were complete, another pair of planets were formed. The two were majestic planets, as evidenced by their names: Enshar, prince forevermost of the heavens, and Klishar, foremost of the first firm lands. They overtook in size the first pair, surpassing them in stature. The descriptions, epitaphs, and location of the second pair easily identified them as Saturn and Jupiter. How in the fuck did they know this? How did they know this? Some time then passed, multiplied by years, and a third pair of planets were brought forth. First came Anu, smaller than Anshar, and Kishar, their son, but larger than the first planet of his ancestors, a rival in size. Then Anu in turn begot a twin planet, his equal, and of his image. The Babylonian version names the planet Nu Dimund, and epitaphs of Enki. Once again, the description of the sizes and locations fits the next known pair of planets in our solar system, Uranus and Neptune. There was yet another planet to be accounted for among these other outer planets, the one we call Pluto. The epic of creation has already referred to Anu as Anshar's firstborn, implying that there was yet another planetary god born to Anshar, Saturn. The epic catches up with the celestial deity later on, when it relates how Anshar sent out his emissary, Gaga, on various missions to the other planets. Gaga appears in function and statues equals to Apsu's emissary Mumu. This brings to mind the many similarities between Mercury and Pluto. Gaga, then, was Pluto, but the Sumerian placed Pluto on their celestial map not beyond Neptune but next to Saturn, whose emissary or satellite it was. As an Act 1 of the epic creation came to an end, there was a solar system made up of the sun and 9 planets. Sun, Apsu, one who exists from the beginning. Mercury, Mumu, counselor and emissary of Apsu. Venus, Lahamu, lady of the battles. Mars, Lamu, deity of war. Tiamat, maiden who gave life. Jupiter, Kishar, foremost of firm lands. There's a whole diagram. Saturn, Enshar, foremost of the heavens. Pluto, Gaga, counselor and emissary of Anshar. Uranus, Anu, he of the heaven. Neptune, Nu Dimun, Ea, artful creator. Where were Earth and the moon? They were yet to be created, products of the forthcoming cosmic collision. With the end of the majestic drama of the birth of the planets, the authors of the creation epic now raise the curtain on Act 2, on a drama of celestial turmoil. The newly created family of planets was far from being stable. The planets were gravitating towards each other. They were converging on Tiamat, disturbing and endangering the primordial bodies. In quotes, the divine brothers banded together. They disturbed Tiamat as they surged back and forth. They were troubling the belly of Tiamat by their antics in the dwelling of heaven. Apsu could not lessen their clamor. Tiamat was speechless at their ways. Their doings were loathsome, troublesome they were, their ways. We have been obvious references to erratic orbits. The new planet, hang on, there's a puzzle here. Hang on. The new planets surged back and forth. They got too close to each other, banded together. They interfere with Tiamat's orbit. They got too close to her belly. Their ways were troublesome. Though it was Tiamat that was principality endangered, Apsu too found the planet's ways loathsome. He announced his intention to destroy or wreck their ways. He huddled with Mumu, conferred with him in secret. But whatever they had plotted between them was overheard by the gods, and the plot to destroy them left them speechless. The only one who did not lose his wit was Ea. He devised a ploy to pour sleep upon Apsu. When the other celestial gods liked the plan, Ea drew a fateful map of the universe and cast a divine spell upon the primeval waters of the solar system. What was this spell or force exerted by Ea? The planet Neptune. Then the outermost planet, as it orbited the sun and circled all the other planets, did its own orbit around the sun affects the sun's magnetism and thus its radioactive outpouring? Or did Neptune itself emit upon its creation some vast radiation of energy? Whatever the effects were, the epic likened them to a pouring of sleep, a calming effect upon Apsu, the sun. Even Mumu, the counselor, was powerless to stir. As in the biblical tale of Samson and Delilah, the hero overcome by sleep could easily be robbed by its powers. Ea moves quickly to rob Apsu of his creative role, quenching, it seems, the immense outpouring of primeval matters from the sun. Ea, aka Neptune, pulled off Apsu's tiara, removed his cloak of aura. Apsu was vanquished. Mumu could no longer roam about. He was bound and left behind, a lifeless planet by his master's side. By depriving the sun of its creativity, stopping the process of emitting more energy and matter to form additional planets, the gods brought temporary peace to the solar system. The victory was further signified by changing the meaning and location of the Apsu. This epitaph was henceforth to be applied to the abode of Ea. Any additional planets could henceforth come only from the new Apsu, from the deep, the far reaches of space that the outermost planet face. How long was it before the celestial's peace was broken once more? The epic does not say, but then it continues with little pause and raises the curtain on Act 3. In the chamber of fates, the place of destinies, a god was endangered, most able and wisest of gods. In the heart of the deep was Marduk created. A new celestial god, a new planet now joins the cast. He was formed in the deep, far out in space, in a zone where orbital motions, a planet's destiny had been imparted to him. He was attracted to the solar system by the outermost planet. He who begot was Ea, Neptune. The new planet was a sight to behold. Alluring was his figure, sparkling the lift of his eyes. Lordly was his gait, commanding as of olden times. Greatly exalted was he above the gods, exceeding throughout. He was the loftiest of the gods, surpassing was his height. His members were enormous. He was exceedingly tall. Appearing from outer space, Marduk was still a newborn planet, belching fire and emanating radiations. When he moved his lips, fire blazed forth. As Marduk neared the other planets, they heaped upon him their awesome flashes, and he shone brightly, clothed with the halo of 10 gods. He approached thus stirred up electrical and other emissions from the other members of the solar system. And a single word here confirms our decipherment of the creation epic. 10 celestial bodies awaited him, the sun, and only 9 other planets. The epic's narrative now takes us along Marduk's speeding course. He first passes by the planet that begot him, that pulled him into the solar system. The planet Ea, Neptune, as Marduk nears Neptune, the later's gravitational pull on the newcomer grows in intensity. It rounds out Marduk's path, making it good for its purpose. Marduk must still have been in a very plastic stage at that time. As he passed by Ea, Neptune, the gravitational pull caused the side of Marduk to bulge as though he had a second head. No part of Marduk, however, was torn off of his passage. But as Marduk reached the vicinity of Uranus, chunks of matter began to tear away from him, resulting in the formation of 4 satellites of Marduk. Anu brought forth and fashioned the 4 sides, consigned their power to the leader of the host, called winds. The 4 were thrust into a fast orbit around Marduk, swirling as a whirlwind. The order of the passage, first by Neptune, then by Uranus, indicates that Marduk was coming into the solar system, not in the system's orbital direction, but counterclockwise, but from the opposite direction, moving clockwise. Moving on, the oncoming planet was soon seized by the immense gravitational and magnetic forces of the giant Enshar, Saturn, then Kishar, Jupiter. His path was bent even more inward into the center of the solar system towards Tiamat. The approach of Marduk soon began to disturb Tiamat and the inner planets Mars, Venus, Mercury. He produced streams, disturbed Tiamat, and the gods were not at rest, carried as in a storm. Though the line of the ancient text was partially damaged here, we can still read that the nearing planet diluted their vitals, pinched their eyes. Tiamat herself paced about distraught, her orbit evidently disturbed. The gravitational pull of the large approaching planet soon began to tear away parts of Tiamat. From her midst, there emerged 11 monsters, a growling, raging throng of satellites who separated themselves from her body and marched at the side of Tiamat. Preparing herself to face the unrushing Marduk, Tiamat crowned them with halos, giving them the appearances of gods, aka planets. Of particular importance to the epic and to the Mesopotamian cosmogony was Tiamat's chief satellite, who was named Kingu, the firstborn among the gods who formed her assembly. She exalted Kingu. In their midst she made him great. The high command of the battle she entrusted into his hand. This book, the fact that he is a scholar that broke down what the Sumerians knew. And the question you have to ask yourself about the creation and the placement of the planets, that they would speak of it in a parable, right? How did they know? How could they possibly know? And, when I think about Alexandria, I'm thinking of Carl Sagan, his old show Cosmos. You see him walking in a CGI kind of replication of the great library of Alexandria, right? They would have known. They knew. And there was more. There was a lot more information. And remember, how in the hell did this information, and that's my question, how did this whole information, this man has written, I think 20 books on the subject of how we were really made. How did this survive the Catholic Church, the Muslim, the Hebrews? How did they survive? And other hordes and conquerors? That's my question. How? Okay, subjected to conflicting gravitational pull, this large satellite of Tiamat began to shift towards Marduk. It was the granting to Kingu of a tablet of destinies, a planetary path of his own, that specially upset the outer planets. Who had granted Tiamat the right to bring forth new planets? Ea asked. He took the problem to Enshar, the giant Saturn. All that Tiamat had plotted to him, he repeated, "She has set up an assembly and is furious with rage. She has added matchless weapons, has borne monster gods. With 11 of this kind she has brought forth. From among the gods who formed her assembly, she has elevated Kingu, her firstborn, made him chief. She has given him a tablet of destinies, fastened it on his breast." Turning to Ea, Enskar asked him whether he could go to slay Kingu. The reply is lost due to the break in the tablet, but apparently Ea did not satisfy Enskar. For the continuing narrative has Enskar turning to Anu, Uranus, to find out whether he would go and stand up to Tiamat. But Anu was unable to face her and turned back. In the agitation of heavens, a confrontational builds. One god after another steps aside. Will no one do battle with the raging Tiamat? Marduk, having passed Neptune and Uranus, is now nearing Enskar, Saturn, and his extended rings. This gives Enskar an idea. He who is potent shall be our avenger. He who is keen in battle. Marduk the hero, coming within reach of Saturn's ring. He kissed the lips of Enskar. Marduk answers, "If I indeed as a young avenger am to vanquish Tiamat, save your lives, convene an assembly to proclaim my destiny supreme." The condition was audacious but simple. Marduk and his destiny, his orbit around the sun, were to be supreme among all the celestial god. It was then that Gaga, Enshar, Saturn's satellite, and the future Pluto was loosened from his course. Enshar opened his mouth. To Gaga, his counselor, a word he addressed. "Be on thy way, Gaga. Take the stand before the gods, and that which I shall tell thee, repeat thou unto them." Passing by the other god planets, Gaga urged them to fix your decrees for Marduk. The decision was anticipated. The gods only too eager to have someone else go to settle the score. For them, Marduk is king, they shouted, and urged him to lose no more time. Go and cut the life of Tiamat. The curtain now rises on Act 4, the celestial battle. The gods had decreed Marduk's destiny. Their combined gravitational pull has now determined Marduk's orbital path, so that he can go but one way, towards a battle, a collision with Tiamat. As befits a warrior, Marduk armed himself with a variety of weapons. He filled his body with blazing flame. He constructed a bow, attached thereon an arrow. In front of him he set the lightning, and he then made a net and full Tiamat therein. These are common names for what could only have been celestial phenomena. The discharge of electrical bolts as the two planets converged, the gravitational pull, a net of one upon the other. But Marduk's chief weapons were his satellites, the four winds, from which Uranus had provided him when Marduk passed that planet, south wind, north wind, east wind, west wind, passing now by the giants, Saturn and Jupiter. And subjected to their tremendous gravitational pull, Marduk brought forth 3 more satellites, Evil Wind, Whirlwind, and Matchless Wind. Using his satellites as a storm chariot, he sent forth the winds that he had brought forth, the 7 of them. The adversaries were ready for battle. The Lord went forth, followed his course. Towards the raging Tiamat he set his face. The Lord approached to scan the inner side of Tiamat, the scheme of Kingu, her consort, to perceive. But as the planets drew nearer, Marduk's course became erratic. As he looks on, his course becomes upset. His direction is distracted. His doings are confused. Even Marduk's satellite began to veer off course. When the gods, his helpers, who were marching at his side, saw the valiant Kingu, blurred became their vision. Were the combatants to miss each other again? But the die was cast. The course irrevocably set on collision. Tiamat emitted a roar. The Lord raised the flooding storm, his mighty weapon, as Marduk came ever closer. Tiamat's fury grew, the roots of her legs shook, and back and forth she commenced to cast spells against Marduk, the same kind of celestial waves Ea had earlier used against Apsu and Mumu, but Marduk kept coming at her. Tiamat and Marduk, the wisest of the gods, advanced against one another. They pressed on to single combat. They approached for battle. The epic now turns to the description of the celestial body and battle to the aftermath on which heaven and earth now are created. The Lord spread out his net to enfold her. The evil wind, the rearmost, he unleashed in her face. As she opened her mouth, Tiamat, to devour him, he drove in the evil wind so that she closed not her lips. The fierce storm winds then charged her belly. Her body became distended. Her mouth had opened wide. He shot there through an arrow. It tore her belly. It cut through her insides, tore into her womb, having thus subdued her. Her life breath he extinguished. Here, then, is a most original theory, explaining the celestial puzzle still confronting us. An unstable solar system, made up of the sun and 9 planets, was invaded by a large comet-like planet from outer space. It first encountered Neptune as it passed by Uranus, then giant Saturn and Jupiter. Its course was profoundly bent towards the solar system's center, and it brought forth 7 satellites. It was unalterably set on a collision course with Tiamat, the next planet in line. But the 2 planets did not collide, a fact of cardinal astronomical importance. It was the satellites of Marduk that smashed into Tiamat. It was not Marduk himself. They distended Tiamat's body, made in her a wide cleavage. Through this fissures in Tiamat, Marduk shot an arrow, a divine lightning, an immense bolt of electricity that jumped as a spark from the energy-charged Marduk. The planet was filled with brilliance. Finding its way into Tiamat's innards, it extinguished her life breath, neutralized Tiamat's own electrical magnetic force and field, and extinguished them. The first encounter between Marduk and Tiamat left her fissures and lifeless, but her final fate was still to be determined by future encounters between the 2. Kingu, leader of the Tiamat satellite, was also to be dealt with separately, but the fate of the other 10 smaller satellites of Tiamat was determined once again. After he had slain Tiamat, the leader, her band was shattered, her host broken up. The gods, her helpers, who marched at her side, trembling with fear, turned their backs about so as to save and preserve their lives. Can we identify this shattered, broken host that trembled and turned their backs about, reversed their direction? By doing so, we offer an explanation to yet another puzzle of our solar system, the phenomenon of the comets. Tiny globes of matter, they are often referred to as the solar system's rebellious members, for they appear to obey none of the normal rules of the road. The orbits of the planets around the sun are, with the exception of Pluto, almost circular. The orbits of the comets are elongated, in most instances, very much so, to the extent that some of them disappear from our view for hundreds or thousands of years. The planets, with the exception of Pluto, orbit with the sun in the same general plane. The comets' orbits lie in many diverse planes. Most significantly, while all the planets known to us circle the sun in the same counterclockwise direction, many comets move in the reverse direction. Astronomers are unable to say what force, what even created the comets and threw them in their unusual orbits. Our answer? Marduk, sweeping in the reverse direction, in an orbital plane of his own, he shattered, broke the host of Tiamat into smaller comets, and affected them by his gravitational pull, his so-called net. Thrown into the net, they found themselves ensnared, the whole band of demons that had marched on her side. He cast into fetters, their hands he bound, tightly encircling, they could not escape. After the battle was over, Marduk took away from Kingu the tablet of destinies, Kingu's independent orbit, and attached it to his own Marduk's breast. His course was bent into permanent solar orbit. From that time on, Marduk was bound always to return to the scene of the celestial battle. Having vanquished Tiamat, Marduk sailed on the heavens, out into space, around the sun, and back to retrace his passage by the outer planets. Ea, Neptune, whose desire Marduk achieved, Enshar, Saturn, whose triumph Marduk established, then his new orbital path returned Marduk to the scene of his triumph. To strengthen his hold onto the vanquished gods, Tiamat and Kingu, as the curtain is about to rise on Act 5, it will be here, and only here, though this has not been realized, that the biblical tale of Genesis joins the Mesopotamian epic of creation. I'm going to stop here for a minute. This is much more complex than the Bible of Genesis. Much more complex. It's literally, before it even creates the planet, it's telling us how it created our universe. For it is only at this point that the tale of creation of earth and heaven really begins. Completing his first ever orbit around the sun, Marduk then returned to Tiamat, whom he had subdued. The Lord paused to view her lifeless body. To divide the monsters, he then artfully planned that as a muscle, he split her open in two parts, like a muscle, like what you eat. Marduk himself now hit the defeated planet, splitting Tiamat in two, severing her skull or upper part. Then another of Marduk's satellites, the one called North Wind, crashed into the separating half. The heavy blow carried his part, destined to become Earth, to an orbit where no planet had ever been orbiting before. The Lord trod upon Tiamat's hinder part. With his weapon, the connected skull, he cut loose. He severed the channels of her blood and caused the north wind to bear it to places that had been unknown. Earth had been created. The lower part that had another fate on the second orbit, Marduk himself hit it, smashing it to pieces. The other half of her he set up as a screen for the skies, locking them together as watchmen. He stationed them. He bent Tiamat's tail to form the great band as a bracelet. The pieces of his broken half were hammered to become a bracelet in the heavens, acting as a screen between the inner planets and the outer planets. They were stretched out into a great band. The asteroid belt had been created. I'm getting chill. I don't know if you guys are understanding what I'm reading, but I hope you are. Because the way he's writing this is he's moving from the actual myth, how it was written by the Sumerians, and how they explained how the entire system of our universe was created. Far cry from Adam and Eve, isn't it? And just, sketching over, he made this, he made that, took a rest for 6, on the 7th day, it was good. It's like they treated us like we were 3 years old. Wow. Astronomers and physicists recognize the existence of great differences between the inner or terrestrial planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and its moon, and Mars, and the other planets, Jupiter and beyond. Two groups separated by the asteroid belt. We now find in the Sumerian epic ancient recognition of these phenomena. Moreover, we are offered for the first time a coherent cosmogonic scientific explanation of the celestial events that led to the disappearance of the missing planet and the resultant creation of the asteroid belt, plus the comets, and of Earth after several of his satellites and his electrical bolt split. Tiamat in two, another satellite of Marduk, shunted her upper half to a new orbit as our planet Earth. Then Marduk, on his second orbit, smashed the lower half to pieces and stretched them into a great celestial band. Every puzzle that we have mentioned is answered by the epic of creation. As we have deciphered it, moreover, we also have the answer to the question of why Earth's continents are concentrated on one side of it and deep cavity, the Pacific Ocean's bed, exists on the opposite side. The constant reference to the waters of Tiamat is also illuminating. She was called the watery monster, and it stands to reason that Earth, as part of Tiamat, was equally endowed with these waters. Indeed, some modern scholars describe Earth as a planet ocean, for it is the only one of the solar system known planets that is blessed with such life-giving waters. New as these cosmological theories may sound, they were accepted fact to the prophets and sages whose words fill the Old Testament. The prophet Isaiah recalled the primeval days when the might of the Lord carved the haughty ones, made spin the watery monster, dried up the waters at Tehumah Raha, called the Lord Yahweh, my primeval king. The psalmist rendered in a few verses this cosmogony of the epic of creation. By thy might the waters thou didst disperse, the leader of the watery monster thou didst break up. Job recalled how this celestial Lord also smote the assistant of the Haughty One, and with impressive astronomical sophistication exalted to the Lord, who the hammered canopy stretched out in the place of Tehom, the earth suspended in the void. His powers the waters did arrest. His energy the Haughty One did cleave. His wind the hammered bracelet measured out. His hand the twisting dragon did extinguish. Holy shit. Biblical scholars now recognize that the Hebrew Tehom, watery deep, stems from Tiamat. That Tehom Rabbah means great Tiamat. The Sumerian cosmological epics. It should also be clear that the first and foremost among these parallels are the opening verses of the book of Genesis, describing how the wind of the Lord hovered over the waters of Tehom, and how the lightning of the Lord Marduk in the Babylonian version lit the darkness of space as it hit and split Tiamat, creating earth and the Rakia, literally the hammered bracelet. This celestial band, Hirtho, translated as firmament, is called the heavens. The book of Genesis 1:8, explicitly, by the way, 1:8-9, right? Creation, explicitly states that it is this hammered out bracelet that the Lord had named heaven, Shamayim. The Akkadian text also called the celestial zone the hammered bracelet, Rakis, and describe how Marduk stretched out Tiamat's lower parts until he brought it end to end, fastened into a permanent great circle. The Sumerian sources leave no doubt that the specific heaven, as distinct from the general concept of heaven and space, was the asteroid belt. Our earth and the asteroid belt are the heaven and earth of both Mesopotamian and biblical references, created when Tiamat was dismembered by the celestial Lord. After Marduk's north wind had pushed earth to its new celestial location, earth obtained its own orbit around the sun, resulting in our seasons, and received its actual spin, giving us day and night. The Mesopotamian text claimed that one of Marduk's tasks after he created earth was indeed to have allotted to earth the days of the sun and established the precinct of day and night. The biblical concepts are identical, and God said, "Let there be lights in the hammered heaven to divide the day and night. Let them be celestial signs, and for season and for days and for years." Modern scholars believe that after Earth became a planet, it was a hot ball of belching volcanoes, filling the skies with a mist and clouds. As temperatures began to cool, the vapors turned to water, separating the face of Earth into dry land and oceans. The fifth tablet of Enuma Elish, though badly mutilated, imparts exactly the same scientific information, describing the gulching lava as Tiamat's spittle. The creation epic correctly places this phenomenon before the formation of the atmosphere, the ocean of earth, and the continents. After the cloud waters were gathered, the oceans began to form, and the foundation of earth, its continents, were raised. As the making of cold, a cooling off took place. Rain and mist appeared. Meanwhile, the spittle continued to pour forth, laying in layers, shaping Earth's topography. Once again, the biblical parallel is clear. And God said, "Let the waters under the skies be gathered together unto one place, and let dry land appear." And so it was. The epic of creation, the Mesopotamian. Earth with oceans, continents, and an atmosphere was now ready for the formation of mountains, rivers, springs, valleys, attributing all creations to the Lord Marduk. Enuma Elish continued the narration. Putting Tiamat's head, Earth, into position. So apparently her true name is Tiamat. Into position, he raised the mountains thereon. He opened springs, the torrents to draw off. Through her eyes he released the Tigris and Euphrates. From her teats he formed the lofty mountains, drilled springs for wells, and the water to carry off. But in perfect accord with modern findings, both the book of Genesis and Enuma Elish and other related Mesopotamian texts place the beginning of life upon earth in the waters, followed by the living creations that swarm and fowl that fly. None until then did living creatures after their kind cattle, and creepy things and beasts appear upon earth, culminating with the appearance of man, the final act of creation. As part of the new celestial order upon earth, Marduk made the divine moon appear, designating him to mark the night, define the days every month. Who was the celestial god? The texts call him Sheshki, celestial god who protects earth. There is no mention earlier in the epic of a planet by this name, yet here he is, within her heavenly pressure, gravitational field, and who is meant by her, Tiamat, or earth. The role and reference to Tiamat and earth appear to be interchangeable. Earth is Tiamat reincarnated. The moon is called Earth's protector. That is exactly what Tiamat called Kingu, her chief satellite. The creation epic specifically excludes Kingu from the host of Tiamat that were shattered and scattered and put into reverse motion around the sun as comets. After Marduk completed his own first orbit and returned to the scene of the battle, he decreed Kingu's separate fate. And Kingu, who had become chief among them, he made shrink. As God Duga Gahi, he counted him. He took from him the tablet of destinies, not rightfully his. Marduk then did not destroy Kingu. He punished him by taking away his independent orbit, which Tiamat had granted him as he grew in size. Shrunk to smaller size, Kingu remained a god, a planetary member of our solar system. Without an orbit, he could only become a satellite again. As Tiamat's upper part was thrown into a new orbit, as the new planet Earth, we suggest Kingu was pulled along. Our moon, we suggest, is Kingu, Tiamat's former satellite. Transformed into a celestial dungi, Kingu had been stripped of his vital elements, atmosphere, waters, radioactive matters. He shrank in size and became a mass of lifeless clay. These Sumerian terms fittingly describe our lifeless moon, its recently discovered history, and the fate that befell this satellite that started out as Kingu, great emissary, and ended up as Dunga, pot of lead. I.W. King, the Seven Tablets of Creation, reported the existence of 3 fragments of an astronomical mythological tablet that presented another version of Marduk's battle with Tiamat, which included verses that dealt with the matter in which Marduk dispatched Kingu. Kingu, her spouse, with a weapon, not of war, he cut away the tablets of destiny, with Kingu he took in his hand. A further attempt by B. Landesberger in 1923 in the this is German, in Archiv für Kelschriftforschung to edit and fully translate the text, demonstrated the interchangeable the name of Kingu, Ensu, and Moon. Do you see why this religion in particular, the Abrahamic religion, is really, it's really concerning. So we have these men who are translating Sumerian tablets, who are actually telling us our beginnings, the beginnings of the planet that became our home for many incarnations. It was right there all along. All the fucking along. And we're being shoved with the Genesis in the Old Testament. I think you should be concerned. Because here we have it. Such texts will not only confirm our conclusions Tiamat's main satellite became our moon, they also explained NASA's finding regarding a huge collision when celestial bodies the size of large cities came crashing into the moon. Both the NASA findings and the text discovered by L.W. King described the moon as the planet that was laid waste. So the Sumerians knew this, 3,000-4,000 years ago? I think we have a problem. So when people say we can't get rid of the Old Testament, I say we have the epic of creation. We know what we need to know. And as for the New Testament, I think personally, me, if I was a Christian, well, I'm not, but if I was a Christian, that's the only thing I'd be reading. And then I would still go after Gnostic Gospel. I would still go after the lost of the Dead Sea Scrolls. and other unpublished gospel, unapproved by the Vatican. You know what I mean? I would still do that because this is insane. Did you know this? Did you know that we had proof? We actually had a metaphoric story of how our planet's solar system was created. Did you know this? Before the Bible was ever invented by Constantine and his bishops. Did you know this? Because I certainly did not. I knew some, but not to this level of understanding. Let me continue. Cylinder seals have been found that depict the celestial battle, showing Marduk fighting a fierce female deity. One such depiction shows Marduk shooting his lightning at Tiamat, with Kingu clearly identified as the moon trying to protect Tiamat, his creator. This pictorial evidence that Earth's moon and Kingu were the same satellite is further enhanced by the etymological fact that the name of this god, Sin, S-I-N, and later times associated with the moon derived from Suon, S-U-E-N, Lord of Wasteland. You can't make this shit up. So this is crazy, right? The moon is a masculine energy, not a feminine, which is interesting, that's a whole different discussion. That's meditations where you guys can connect with your guides to see how does that work. Does that show the balance of the anima animus within us? The moon cycle of the womb of women? Or the feminine, which is this planet Earth, we call her mother, right? We call her Mother Earth, Gaia, Bhumi, right? We call her Bhumi, Pachamama, we call her Pachamama, so definitely a feminine. And is the moon her consort? Having disposed of Tiamat and Kingu, Marduk once again crossed the heavens and surveyed the regions. This time his attention was focused on the dwellings of Nu Dimud, Neptune, to fix a final destiny for Gaga, the erstwhile satellite of Enshar, Saturn, who was made an emissary to the other planets. The epic informs us that one of his final acts in the heavens, Marduk assigned the celestial god to a hidden place, Hir Etho, or known orbit, facing the deep outer space, and entrusted to him the counselorship of the watery deep. In line with his new position, the planet was renamed Usmi, one who shows the way, the outermost planet of our Pluto. Holy fuck. Yeah, there it is. I don't know if you have a map, but you've got the sun, right? You've got Mercury, Venus. I'm just going to read it to you. So you've got the sun, Alpo, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. This is how the asteroid belt, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, Gaga, at the end. Anyway, let's continue. Indeed, he did. He eliminated from the heavens the sun's first partner in creation, Tiamat. He brought Earth into being, thrusting it into a new orbit nearing the sun. He hammered a bracelet in the heavens, the asteroid belt that does separate the group of inner planets from the group of outer planets. He turned most of Tiamat's satellites into comets. Her chief satellites, Kingu, he put into orbit around Earth to become the moon. And he shifted a satellite of Saturn, Kaga, to become the planet Pluto, imparting it to some of Marduk's own orbital characteristics, such as different orbital planets. The puzzle of our solar system, the oceanic cavities upon Earth, the devastation upon the moon, the reverse orbits of the comets, the enigmatic phenomena of Pluto, all are perfectly answered by the Mesopotamian creation epic as deciphered by us. Again, it's called creation epic. Having thus constructed the station for the planets, Marduk took for himself station Nibiru and crossed the heavens and surveyed the new solar system. It was now made up of 12 celestial planets with 12 great gods as their counterpart. Wow, fuck. I'm going to jump. I'm going to jump and go right into page 334, which chapter 14, literally 7 chapters out, when the gods fled from Earth. You're going to love this because it's about the deluge and the concept of the deluge, which if you've studied or you have a fascination with Lemuria and Atlantis, this may rock your mind, okay? Let me take a little bit of tea. Okay. When the gods fled from earth. What was the deluge? Whose raging waters swept over earth? Some explain the flood in terms of the annual inundation of the Tigris-Euphrates plain. One such inundation, it is surmised, must have been particularly severe. Fields and cities, men and beasts were swept away by the rising waters, and primitive people, seeing the event as a punishment by the gods, began to propagate the legends of a deluge. In one of his books, Excavation at Ur, Sir Leonard Woolley relates how in 1929, as the work of the Royal Cemetery at Ur was drawing to a close, the workmen sank a small shaft at a nearby mound, digging through a mass of broken pottery and crumbled brick. 3 feet down, they reached a level of hard-packed mud, usually soil marking the point where civilization had started. But could the millennia of urban life have left only 3 feet of archaeological strata? Sir Leonard Woolley directed the workmen to dig further. They went down another 3 feet, then another 5. They still brought up virgin soil, mud, with no traces of human habitation. But after digging through 11 feet of still to dry mud, the workmen reached a stratum containing pieces of broken green pottery and flint instruments. An earlier civilization had been buried under 11 feet of mud. Sir Leonard jumped into the pit, examined the excavation. He called in his aides, seeking their opinion. No one had a plausible theory. Then Sir Leonard's wife remarked almost casually, "Well, of course, it's the flood." Other archaeological delegations to Mesopotamia, however, cast doubt on this marvelous intuition. The stratum of mud contained no traces of habitation, did indicate flooding, but while the deposits of Ur and Al-Ubed suggested flooding sometimes between 3,500 to 4,000 BC. Holy shit. It changes our idea because some people consider that the deluge, the great deluge of Atlantis was 13,000 years ago. A similar deposit uncovered later at Kish was estimated to have occurred circa 2800 BC. The same day, 2800 BC, was estimated for mud strata found at Erhech and Shuruppak, the city of the Sumerian Noah. At Nivena, excavators found at a depth of some 60 feet no less than 13 alternative strata of mud and riverine sand dating from around 4000 to 3000 BC. Most scholars therefore believe that what Woolley found were traces of diverse local flooding, frequent occurrences in Mesopotamia, where occasionally torrential rains and the swelling of the two great rivers and their frequent courses caused such havoc. All the varying mud strata scholars have concluded were not the comprehensive calamity, the monumental prehistoric event that the deluge must have been. The Old Testament is a masterpiece of literary brevity and precision. The works are always well chosen to convey precise meaning. The verses are to the point, their order is purposeful, their length is no more than an absolute need. It is noteworthy that the whole story from creation through the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden is told in 80 verses. The complete record of Adam and his line, even told separately for Cain and his line, and Seth, Enosh, and their line, is 58 verses. But the story of the Great Flood merited no less than 87 verses. It was by any editorial standard a major story. No mere local event, it was a catastrophe affecting the whole of earth, the whole of mankind. The Mesopotamian texts clearly state that the four corners of the earth were affected. As such, it was a crucial point in the prehistory of Mesopotamia. There were events in the cities and the people before the deluge, and the events in cities and people after the deluge. They were all the deeds of the gods, and the kingship that they lured from heaven before the great flood, and the course of godly and human events when kingship was lured again to earth after the great flood. It was the great time divider. Not only the comprehensive king list, but also texts relating to individual kings and their ancestries made mention of the deluge. One, for example, pertaining to Ninunart, recalled the deluge as an event remote in time. On that day, on that remote day, on that remote night, in that remote year when the deluge had taken place. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, a patron of the sciences who amassed a huge library of clay tablets in Nineveh, professed in one of his commemorative inscriptions that he had found and was able to read stone inscriptions from before the deluge. An Akkadian text dealing with names in their origins explained that it lists names of kings from after the deluge. A king was exalted as seed of preserved from before the deluge. Various scientific texts quoted as their source the olden sages from before the deluge. No, the deluge was no more local occurrences or periodic inundation. It was by all accounts an earth-shaking event of unparalleled magnitude. Its catastrophe, the likes of which neither man nor gods experienced before or since. The biblical and Mesopotamian texts that we have examined so far leave a few puzzles to be solved. What was the ordeal suffered by the mankind, in respect to which Noah was named respite, with the hope that his birth signaled an end to the hardship? What was the secret the God swore to keep, of whose disclosure Enki was accused? Why was the launching of a space vehicle from Sippar the signal to Utnapishtim to enter and seal the ark? Where were the gods while the waters covered even the highest mountains? Why did they so cherish the roasted meat sacrifice offered by Noah? And by the way, Noah's was known as Utnapishtim. As we proceed to find the answers to these and other questions, we shall find that the deluge was not premeditated punishment brought about by the gods at their exclusive will. We shall discover that though the deluge was a predictable event, it was an unavoidable one, a natural calamity in which the gods played not an active but a passive role. We will also show that the secret the gods swore to was a conspiracy against mankind, to withhold from the earthlings the information they had regarded the coming avalanche of water, so that while the Nephilim saved themselves, mankind should perish. Much of our greatly increased knowledge of the deluge and the events preceding it comes from the text When the Gods as Men. In it, the hero of the deluge is called Atra Asis. In the deluge segment of the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enki called Utnapishtim the exceedingly wise, which is Akkadian in Astrahast. Scholars theorize that the text in which Atrahasis is the hero might be part of an earlier Sumerian deluge story. In time enough, Babylonian, Assyrian, Canaanite, and even original Sumerian tablets were discovered to enable a major reassembly of the Atra-Asis epic. Remember, it's called the Atra, A-T-R-A, Asis, H-A-S-I-S, epic. A masterful work credited primarily to W.L. Lambert and A.R. Millard. So it's called Atra-Asis, the Babylonian story of the flood. After describing the hard work of the Anunnaki, their mutiny, and the ensuing creation of the primitive worker, the epic relates how man, as we know from the biblical version, began to procreate and multiply. In time, mankind began to upset Enlil. The land extended, the people multiplied. In the land, like wild bulls, they lay. The gods got disturbed by their conjugations. The god Enlil hurled their pronouncements and said to the great gods, "Oppressive have become the pronouncement of mankind. Their conjugations deprive me of sleep." Enlil once again cast a prosecutor of mankind, then ordered a punishment. We should expect to read now of the coming deluge, but not so. Surprisingly, Enlil did not mention a deluge or any kind of watery ordeal. Instead, he called for the decimation of mankind through pestilence and sickness. The Akkadian and Assyrian version of the epic speak of aches, dizziness, chills, and fever, as well as disease, sickness, and plague, pestilence, afflicting mankind and its last livestock, following Enlil's call for punishment. But Enlil's scheme did not work. The one who was exceedingly wise, Atrahasis, happened to be especially close to the god Enki. Telling his own story in some of the versions, he says, I am Atrahasis. I lived in the temple of Ea, my lord. With his mind alert to his lord Enki, Atrahasis appealed to him to unto his brother Enlil's plan. Ea, O Lord, mankind groans, the anger of the gods consumed the land, yet it is thou who hast created us. Let there cease the aches, the dizziness, let the chills, the fevers. Wow. So there was a plague, it sounds like. Until more pieces of the broken off tablets are found, we shall not know what Enki's advice was. He said of something, let there appear in the land. And that's all there is. It's like a fragment. Whatever it was, it worked. Soon thereafter, Enlil complained bitterly to the gods that the people had not diminished. They are more numerous than before. He then proceeded to outline the extermination of mankind through starvation. Let supplies be cut off from the people. In their bellies, let fruit and vegetables be wanting. The famine was to be achieved through natural forces by a lack of rain and failing irrigation. Now I'm going to pause. Sounds familiar. Let the rains of the rains, God, be withheld from above. Below, let the waters not rise from their sources. Let the winds blow and parch the ground. Let the clouds thicken, but hold back the downpour. We are rainmakers, my friends. Never forget that. You are all rainmakers. Even the sources of seafood were to disappear. Enki was ordered to draw the bolt, bar the sea, and guard its food away from the people. Soon the drought began to spread devastation. From above, the heat was not. Below, the waters did not rise from their sources. The womb of the earth did not bear. Vegetations did not sprout. The black fields turned white. The broad plains was choked with salt. Well, they have skeletals of sea life in the Sahara Desert, so it's not hard to believe that could happen. The resulting famine caused havoc among the people. Conditions got worse as time went on. The Mesopotamian texts speak of 6 increasingly devastating sha'atams, a term that some translate as years, but which literally means passings, and as the Assyrian versions made clear, a year of Anu. For one shahatam, they ate the earth's grass. Where have you seen that? Where people ate grass. Many of you have recently seen that. For the second shahatam, they suffered the vengeance. The third shahatam came. Their features were altered by hunger. Their faces were encrusted. They were living on the verge of death. When the third shahatam arrived, their faces appeared green. They walked hunched in the streets. Their broad shoulders became narrow. By the fifth passing, human life began to deteriorate. Mothers barred their doors to their own starving daughters. Daughters spied on their mothers to see whether they had hidden any food. By the sixth passing, cannibalism was rampant. When the sixth shahatam arrived, they prepared the daughters for a meal. The child they prepared for food. One house devoured the other. Holy fuck. Holy fuck. On a spiritual level, that would create a fall into 3D. Obviously. The text reports the persistent intercession by Atrahasis, god Enki. In the house of his god, he set foot every day. He wept, bringing oblations in the morning. He called by the name of his god, seeking Enki's help to avert the famine. Enki, however, must have felt bound by the decision of the other deities, for at first he did not respond. Quite possibly, he even hid from his faithful worshiper by leaving the temple and sailing into his beloved marshlands. When the people were living on the edge of death, Atrahasis placed his bed facing the river, but there was no response. The sight of starving, disintegrating mankind, of parents eating their own I won't say anything. You got it. Finally brought about the unavoidable, another confrontation between Enki and Enlil. In the seventh pathing, when the remaining men and women were like ghosts of the dead, they received a message from Enki. Make loud noise in the land, he said. Send out heralds to command all the people. Do not revere your gods. Do not pray to your goddesses. There was to be a total disobedience. Wow, did you hear that? Under the cover of such turmoil, Enki planned more concrete action. The text, quite fragmented at this point, disclosed that they convened a secret assembly of elders in his temple. They took counsel in the house of Enki. First, Enki exonerating himself, telling them how he had opposed the acts of the other gods. Then he outlined a plan of action. It somehow involved his command of the seas and the lower worlds. We can glean the clandestine details of the plan from the fragmentary verses. In the night, ... after he, blank, someone had to be by the banks of the river. At a certain time, perhaps to await the return of Enki from the lower world. From there, Enlil brought the water warriors. Perhaps also some of the earthlings who were primitive workers in the mines. At the appointed time, commands were shouted. Go, the order. In spite of missing lines, we can gather what had happened from the reaction of Enlil. He was filled with anger. He summoned the assembly of the gods and sent his sergeant at arms to fetch Enki. Then he stood up and accused his brother of breaking the surveillance and containment plans. All of us, great Anunnaki, reach together a decision. I command that in the bird of heaven, Adad should guard the upper region, that Sin and Nagar should guard the earth's middle region, that the bolt, the bar of the sea, you, Enki, should guard with your rockets, but you let loose provisions for the people. Enlil accused his brother of breaking the bolt to the sea, but Enki denied that it had happened with his consent. The bolt, the bar of the sea, I did guard with my rockets, but when escaped from me a myriad of fish, it disappeared. They broke off the bolt. They had killed the guard of the sea. He claimed that he had caught the culprits and punished them, but Enlil was not satisfied. He demanded that Enki stop feeding his people, that he no longer supply corn rations on which the people thrive. The reaction of Enki was astounding. The god got fed up with his sitting. In the assembly of the gods, laughter overcame him. We can imagine the pandemonium. Enlil was furious. There were heated exchanges with Enki and shouted, "There's a slander in this hand." When the assembly was finally called to order, Enlil took the floor again. He reminded his colleagues and subordinates that it had been in a unanimous decision. He reviewed the events that led to the fashioning of the primitive worker and recalled the many times that Enki broke the rule. But he said there was still a chance to doom mankind. A killing flood was in the offing. The approaching catastrophe had to be kept secret from the people. He called on the assembly to swear themselves to secrecy, and most important, to bind Prince Enki by an oath. Enlil opened his mouth to speak and addressed the assembly of all the gods. Come, all of us, and take an oath regarding the killing flood. Anu swore first. Enlil swore. His son swore with him. At first, Enki refused to take the oath. Why will you bind me with an oath, he asked. I am to raise my hands against my own humans? But he was finally forced to take the oath. One of the texts specifically states, Anu, Enlil, Enki, and Nibiru, the gods of heaven and earth, have taken the oath. The die was cast. What was the oath he was bound by? As Enki chose to interpret it, he swore not to reveal the secret of the coming deluge to the people, but he could not tell it to a wall. Calling Asas to the temple, he made him stay behind a screen. Then Enki pretended to speak not to his devout earthling, but to the wall. Read screen, he said. Pay attention to my instructions. On all the habitations over the cities, a storm will sweep. The destruction of mankind's seed will be. This is the final ruling, the word of the assembly of the gods, and the words spoken by Anu, Enlil, and Nibiru. This is amazing. So, Noah, There was an incredible scholar. Her name was Zecharia S. And she wrote she wrote books the size of Bibles about the appropriation of the past. I won't call this a religion. The past, how should I call this? Past knowledge, ancient knowledge that had been appropriated by the Abrahamic religions as downloads, as if they had invented it, as if they had been, we're so amazing, we're having fucking downloads. No, you just read this shit and you took it and made it yours. This is like probably the most important books you'll ever read, honestly. You should all buy copies. Hang on. Let me tell you how many books. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's a volume of 7 books by Zecharia Sitchin. And it explains how we were made. And we were not apes. We were not apes. And if you were here in the beginning, you know what I read in the Genesis. We were not apes. Darwin's theory was such bullshit, it's insane. Especially with the fact that during Darwin's little reign of terror, they had this knowledge, obviously. They knew this. They all knew this. If you ever study anything at all, in terms of another great scholar, his name was Martin Bernal. He was a Jewish scholar. And he studied the Semitic race, and so he wrote the books Black Athena. And in it, he accuses the 19th century historians from distorting history. So you've got Darwinism in the 19th century. You've got Egyptologists. You can start with Napoleon, who actually, with Champollion, who first actually conquered Egypt, and Champollion, who broke the hieroglyphic code, Rosetta Stone, I believe, if I'm correct. And Pompeii, and how Pompeii was segregated. All of its truth was segregated from crowds. There's a whole Pompeii was the Las Vegas of ancient Rome. Let's just call it that. I'll call it that. It was the Las Vegas of so sexuality was everywhere. It was the most inappropriate place, okay? And the Victorian era, 19th century, made sure that it was segregated, so that if you were born even in the 1940s, you'd never see it. They removed it, and you could go and visit it by special permission. By the way, I believe that's still a fact. So let's continue. Enki's advice to his faithful servant was to build a water horse, a vessel, but when the latter said, "I have never built a boat, draw for me a design on the ground that I may see," Enki provided him with precise instructions regarding the boat. Its measurement and its construction, steeped in Bible stories, we imagine this ark at a very large boat with decks and superstructures, but the biblical tibah stems from the root sunken, and it must be constructed that Enki instructed his Noah to construct a submersible boat, a submarine. Did you hear that? A submarine. The Akkadian text quotes Enki as calling for a boat roofed over and below, hermetically sealed with tough pitch, there to be no decks, no openings, so that the sun shall not see inside. It was to be a boat like an apsu boat, a sulidi. It is the very term used nowadays in Hebrew, solet, to denote a submarine. Let the boat, Enki said, be a ma-gur-gur, a boat that can turn and tumble. Indeed, only such a boat could have survived an overpowering avalanche of water. A fucking submarine. Jules Verne, I don't know if you know who I mean. Jules Verne wrote 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He wrote, in fact, he was so advanced that the man who created the helicopter was a child reading Jules Verne's books and was so inspired by the helicopter because Jules Verne had written about it before it was ever invented. Based on how he described it, he invented it. The submarine is also mentioned in Jules Verne's books before it was ever invented. So what does that say? Well, why am I saying that? Because what I'm going to say to you is that we have this primal remembrance of so much. It is all lodged in the great infinite library called the Akasha, or Akashic records. And we have a propensity as human beings, when we allow ourselves to get what we call downloads, what I call the unspoken knowing. Again, going back to EMC square, for example, and if you follow me for years, you know I've read to you about the holographic universe, which will continue with some new authors. And how knowledge and energy comes to us. It's weird. It's like light codes going through our crown chakra. And suddenly we started having a memory of things we think is impossible. Okay. So the Atra Asi, again, his name is for, we're talking about Noah here. Like others, reiterates that although the calamity was only 7 days away, the people were unaware of its calamity, of its approach, Atra Asi used the excuse that the Apsu vessel was being built so that he could leave for Enki's abode and perhaps thereby avert Enlil's anger. This was readily accepted, for things were really bad. Noah's father had hoped that his birth signaled the end of a long time of suffering. The people's problem was a drought, the absence of rain, the shortage of water. Who in their right mind would have thought that they were about to perish in an avalanche of water? Hello? Yet, if the humans could not read the signs, the Nephilim could. To them, the deluge was not a sudden event, though it was unavoidable. They detected its coming. I would say you can smell rain before it comes. Their scheme to destroy mankind rested not on an active but on a passive role by the gods. They did not cause the deluge. They simply connived to withhold from the earthlings the fact that it was coming. Aware, however, of the impending calamity and of its global impact, the Nephilim took steps to save their own skin. With Earth about to be engulfed by water, they could only go in one direction for protection, skyward. When the storm that preceded the deluge began to blow, the Nephilim took to their shuttlecrafts and remained in Earth orbit until the waters began to subside. The day of the deluge, we will show, was the day the gods fled from Earth, the sign from which Pishtim had to watch, upon which he was to join all the others in the ark and seal it, was this: when Shamsha, who orders a trembling at dusk, will shower down a rain of eruptions, board thou the ship, batten up the entrance. Shamash, as we know, was in charge of the spaceport at Sipar. There's no doubt in our mind that Enki instructed Ubnashipa to watch for the first sign of space launching at Sipar. Shirupak, where Ubnashipa lived, was only 18 biru, some 180 kilometers or 112 miles south of Sipar. Since the launchings were to take place at dusk, there would be no problem in seeing the rain of eruption that the rising rocket ships would shower down. Few the Nephilim were prepared for the deluge. Its coming was a frightening experience. The noise of the deluge set the gods trembling, but when the moment to leave Earth arrived, the gods, shrinking back, ascended to the heavens of Anu. The Assyrian version of Atra Asis speaks of the gods using Ruku Ilani, Chariot of the Gods. There was a documentary called Chariots of the Gods made in the 70s to escape from Earth. The Anunnaki lifted up their rocket ships like torches, setting the land ablaze with their glare. Orbiting Earth, the Nephilim saw a scene of destruction that affected them deeply. The Gilgamesh texts tell us that as the storm grew in intensity, not only could one see his fellow, it's in quotation marks, but neither could the people be recognized from the heaven. Crammed into their spacecraft, the gods strained to see what was happening on the planet from which they had blasted off. The gods cowered like dogs, crouched against the outer wall. Ishtar cried out like a woman in travail. The olden days are alas turned to clay. The Anunnaki gods wept with her. The gods, all humbled, sit and wept, their lips drawn tight, one and all. The Atra Asis texts echo the same theme. The gods fleeing were watching the destruction at the same time, but the situation within their own vessel was not very encouraging either. Apparently, they were divided among several ships. Tablet 3 of the Atra Asis epic describes the conditions on board where some of the Anunnaki shared accommodations with the mother goddess. The Anunnaki great gods were sitting in thirst and hunger. Nintu wept and spent her emotions. She wept and eased their feelings. The gods wept with her for the land. She was overcome with grief. She thirsted for beer. Where she sat, the gods sat weeping, crouching like sheep at a trough. Their lips were feverish of thirst. They were suffering, cramped from hunger. The mother goddess herself, Nuhusak, was shocked by the utter devastation. She bewailed what she was seeing. The goddess saw and she wept. Her lips were covered with feverishness. My creatures have become like flies. They fill the rivers like dragonflies. Their fatherhood was taken by the rolling sea. Could she indeed save her own life while mankind, which she helped create, was dying? Could she really leave the earth? She asked out loud. Shall I ascend up to the heavens to reside in the house of offerings, where Anu, the Lord, had offering to go? The orders of the Nephilim became clear. Abandon earth. Ascend to heaven. It was time when the 12th planet was nearest Earth, within the asteroid belt, heaven, as evidenced by the fact that Anu was able to attend personally the crucial conference shortly before the deluge. Hang on for a quick second. Any questions or comments on this? Any questions or comments? It's pretty intense, isn't it? And to think that he has 7 books on this. 7 books. Hang on, I'm going to continue reading. Bear with me. Okay. It continues, and we're almost done. Okay. Okay, what's going on here? My phone's about to die, so I might not be able to finish. Oh, here we go, I think. Okay. Yeah, okay, got it. Enlil and Ni-Nurta, accompanied perhaps by the elite of the Anunnaki, those who had manned Nippur, were in one safe spacecraft, planning no doubt to rejoin the main spaceship, but the other gods were not so determined. Forced to abandon Earth, they suddenly realized how attached they had become to it and its inhabitants. In one craft, Nirhusak and her group of Anunnaki debated the merit of the orders given by Anu. In another, Ishtar cried out, "The olden days, alas, are turned into clay." The Anunnaki who were in her craft wept with her. Enki was obliviously yet in another spacecraft, or else he would have disclosed to the others that he had managed to save the seed of mankind. No doubt he had other reasons to feel less gloomy, for the evidence suggests that he had planned the encounter at Arat. The ancient versions appear to imply that the ark was simply carried to the region of Arat by the torrential waves, and a south storm would indeed drive the boat northward. But the Mesopotamian texts reiterate that Atra Asu Umnapishu took along with him a boatman named Puzur Amuri, Westerner who knows the secrets. To him, the Mesopotamian Noah handed over the structure together with its contents. As soon as the storm started, why was an experienced navigator needed unless it was to bring the ark to a specific location? Wow. The Nephilim, as we have shown, used the peaks of Arat as landmark from the very beginning, as the highest peak in that part of the world. They could be expected to reappear first from under the mantle of water. Since Enki, the wise one, the all-knowing, certainly would have figured that much out, we can surmise that he had instructed his servant to guide the ark towards Ararat, planning the encounter from the very beginning. Berosus' version of the flood, as reported by the Greek Abydinas, oh my God, this is insane, relates Kronos, right, time? Kronos revealed to Sistostros that there would be a deluge on the 15th day of Deasis, the 2nd month, and ordered him to conceal in Sippar, the city of Shamashash. Every availability written, Sisostros accomplished all these things, sailed immediately to Armenia, and thereupon what the god had announced did happen. Berosus, okay, I'm going to stop for a minute because the whole entire Old Testament is corrupted. It's actually it's not. This is it right here. We have the facts. This is, the scholars aren't saying this is made up. It's too complex. There's too much and too much and too much data. I mean, finding cuneiforms with this language telling us. We have cuneiforms that tell us about money owed. We have cuneiforms of a woman writing a recipe. Did you know that? And here we have this long story of the very beginning of the beginnings. And so just so you know, when I do Akashic readings, right? Many of us are starseeds. You could call them Anunnaki if you want. I don't care. But we come from other planets. We were on other planets before we ever landed here. And as souls, we don't need a rocket to travel. Just on the side note, in case like people can feel, how do we get here from here? We're souls. We're electricity. We travel by consciousness, by frequency match, by desire. Okay, let's continue. The nice thing is, I gotta say, that the Anunnaki, all right, felt really fucking bad. In fact, they were fucking sobbing at the seed of mankind in their mind being completely eradicated. Okay. As soon as Atrahasis had landed, he slaughtered some animals and roasted them on fire. No wonder that the exhausted and hungry gods gathered like flies over the offering. Suddenly they realized that man and the flood he grew and the cattle he raised were essential. When at length Enlil arrived and saw the ark, he was wroth. But the logic of the situation and Enki's persuasion prevailed. Enlil made his peace with the remnants of mankind and took Atrahasis in his craft up to the eternal abode of the gods. Another factor in the quick decision to make peace with mankind may have been the progressive abatement of the flood and the reemergence of dry land and the vegetation upon it. We have already concluded that the Nephilim became aware ahead of time of the approaching calamity. But it was so unique in their experience that they feared that Earth would have become uninhabitable forever. As they landed on Ararat, they saw that this was not so. Earth was still habitable, and to live on it, they needed man. What was this catastrophe? Predictable yet unavoidable. An important key to unlocking the puzzle of the deluge is the realization that it was not a single sudden event, but the climax of a chain of events. Unusual pestilence affecting man and beast and a severe drought preceded the ordeal by water, a process that lasted, according to the Mesopotamian sources, 7 years. These phenomena could be accounted for only by major climatic changes, such as changes that have been associated in Earth's past with the recurring ice age and interglacial stages that have dominated Earth's immediate past. Reduced precipitation, falling sea and lakes, and the drying up of subterranean water sources have been the hallmark of an approaching ice age. Since the deluge that abruptly ended those conditions was followed by the Sumerian civilization, our own present post-glacial age, the glaciation in question could have only been the last one. Our conclusion is that in the events of the deluge related to the Earth's last ice age and its catastrophic ending. Drilling into the Arctic and Antarctic ice sheets, scientists have been able to measure the oxygen trapped in the various layers and to judge from that the climate that prevailed millennia ago. Core samples from the bottom of the sea, such as the Gulf of Mexico, measuring, do you think they'll actually ban me for saying this? Measuring proliferation or dwindling of marine life, likewise enable them to estimate temperatures in ages past. Based on such findings, scientists are now certain that the last ice age began some 75,000 years ago and underwent a mini warm-up some 40,000 years ago. Circa 38,000 years ago, a harsher, colder, and drier period ensued. And then, about 13,000 years ago, the ice age abruptly ended and our present mild condition was ushered in. Aligning the biblical and Sumerian information, we find that the harsh time, the accretion of earth, began in the time of Noah's father Lamech. His hopes that the birth of Noah, respite, would mark the end of the hardship was fulfilled and unexpected through the catastrophe of deluge. It's not, this is not their story. Do you understand what I'm saying by that? This is Sumerian Mesopotamian. That is their story. That is their recollection of how we were made, how the universe was made, how this planet was made, how we appeared, how suddenly we created civilization. Out of nowhere, we were taught by other beings how to, obviously, right? And this was completely stolen and created into these books. And then the proof of it, right, was burnt. Now, we know, and this is known, by the way, anybody will tell you that's got some fucking level of education. The Arabs, aka the Muslim world, copied a lot of this text, as did the Byzantine Empire. 75% Arabic, 25% Byzantine, and the Irish who say civilization was mostly biblical stuff that they were copying, and their own culture, by the way. So this was appropriated from the Middle East, from the Mesopotamian people. And this should piss you off, that even though, obviously, here we are, right? I have all these volumes of books and this and that, written by Zecharia Sitchin. I, in the beginning, read to you all of the accolades and congratulations of this particular book, the 12th Planet. And yet, there are certain people who have an agenda to call it kakipu. Kakipu, why? Well, because it keeps you from knowledge. And knowledge is power. Because once you realize that this was written before there was a Bible, before any of the Abrahamic religions, you realize you've been fucking duped. And that should irritate you. Let me see. There's still some, what I would call fragments. You know what? Let me jump around. Hang on. Okay, let's go into here. In 1964, A.T. Wilson of Victoria University in New Zealand offered the theory that ice ages ended abruptly in such slippages not only in the Antarctica but also in the Arctic. We feel that the various texts and the facts gathered by us justify a conclusion that the deluge was the result of such a slippage into the Antarctic waters of billions of tons of ice, bringing an abrupt end to the last ice age. The sudden event triggered an immense tidal wave. Starting in Antarctica waters, it spread northward towards the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. The abrupt change in temperature must have created a violent storm accompanied by torrents of rain moving faster than the waters. The storm clouds and darkened sky heralded the avalanche of water. Exactly such phenomena are described in the ancient texts. A commander by Enki, Atrahasis, sent everybody aboard the ark while he himself stayed outside to await the signal for boarding the vessel and sealing it off. Providing a human interest detail, the ancient texts tell us that Atrahasis, through ordered the stay outside the vessel, was in and out. He could not sit, could not crouch. His heart was broken. He was vomiting gale. But then the moon disappeared. The appearance of the weather changed. The rains roared in the clouds. The winds became savage. The deluge set out. Its might came upon the people like a battle. One person did not see another. Then they were not recognizable in the destruction. The deluge bellowed like a bull. The winds whinnied like wild ass. The darkness was intense. Excuse me. The sun could not be seen. Sorry. And then we go into the Epic of Gilgamesh. But I think I've pushed my throat. So I'll stop here. Anyway, this will be on YouTube, hopefully without the coughing. And we'll go from there. All right, sending you much love on your journey. Namaste.